Our reading today comes from Mark 16, 1 through 15. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James and Salome, brought spices so that they might go and anoint him. And very early on the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. They had been saying to one another, "Who will roll away the stone from us from the entrance to the tomb?" When they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had already been rolled back. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. But he said to them, "Do not be alarmed. You are looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has been raised. He is not here. Look, there is the place they laid him. But go, tell his disciples and Peter that he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him just as he told you." So they went out and fled from the tomb, for terror and amazement had seized them, and they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. And all that had been commanded them they told briefly to those around Peter. And afterward, Jesus himself sent out through them from east to west the sacred and imperishable proclamation of eternal salvation. Amen. Now, after he rose early on the first day of the week, he appeared first to Mary Magdalene, from whom he had cast out 7 demons. She went out and told those who had been with him while they were mourning and weeping. But when they heard that he was alive and had been seen by her, they would not believe it. After this, he appeared in another form to 2 of them as they were walking into the country. And they went back and told the rest, but they did not believe them. Later, he appeared to the 11 themselves as they were sitting at the table, and he upbraided them for their lack of faith and stubbornness, because they had not believed those who saw him after he had risen. And he said to them, "Go into all the world and proclaim the good news to the whole creation." And so today will be a pastoral reflection. It is going to be very brief because today is Cantata Sunday. But I want to speak briefly of, and ask, where do we see Christ today? Today is the end of Holy Week. And for those of you who were here on Good Friday, we talked about the line of Jesus, "I have set an example for you to follow." So often when we look at even our Apostles' Creed, we focus on the birth and on the resurrection, and we forget the life and ministry of Jesus, who set an example for us. That we are called to love and live into that love. Earlier today, the forms that Christ take, because when you read the resurrection stories, you see over and again people who do not recognize Jesus when he appears before them. And as I mentioned earlier, it's probably not surprising that they did not recognize the risen Christ, because so often they overlook Jesus' message. Jesus, throughout the Gospels, will say continually, "How could you have traveled with me so long and still don't understand?" So he gives communion. He washes the feet of people he knows miss the point and often make mistakes. And his very last miracle before he goes to the cross is healing the damage of one of his disciples. So we have an example to follow of Jesus' love. To love God with all of our being, to love our neighbors as ourselves, to love ourselves in a healthy and healing way, to love our enemies And then his final, where he lifts the bar even higher. Love as I have loved, which is an all-encompassing love. That is the example we are called to follow. And I pray that in our families and in our churches and our communities, in our nation and throughout the world, that we find a way to live into that example. Because if we live into that love, will there not be healing at every level and every relationship? So I pray that we follow that example, that we recognize Christ in the various forms that he takes. Because how often when we are at the end of our rope and full of despair, Christ Emmanuel appears. And sometimes that appears as a nurse at the bedside, a card from a friend. Sometimes it's a phone call. Christ appears in many ways around us. And I pray that we recognize Christ Emmanuel here amongst ourselves. And so what I want to leave you with as we move into our cantata is this question: where do we see Christ today? Because Christ is with us. Christ is risen. Christ is risen indeed. Hallelujah. May we live into that, in the fullness of love, together and wherever we go. May it be so.